Welcome back to the Liz Wheeler Show. This is Blaire Fleming. Blaire Fleming is a man masquerading as a woman who plays on the women's volleyball team for San Jose State University. Look at this man. Would this fool you for an instant? Look at that neck. Look at those legs. You can't hide man legs. Blaire Fleming doesn't identify openly as transgender in order to hide his biological sex, the fact that he is a man pretending to be a woman. But he's not fooling anybody. The University of Nevada, Reno Wolfpack women's volleyball team forfeited their game. It was expected to be played on October 28th. They forfeited preemptively because they said it's unfair for them to compete against a biological man, and in fact poses a safety risk to the women on that team. This is their statement. It's beautifully done. They say, we, the University of Nevada, Reno women's volleyball team, forfeit against San Jose State University and stand united in solidarity with the volleyball teams of Southern Utah University, Boise State University, the University of Wyoming, and Utah State University. We demand that our right to safety and fair competition on the court be upheld. We refuse to participate in any match that advances injustice against female athletes. Guys, I don't think I've ever been so proud. We are in a situation in our country where these girls, these female athletes, they're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. They're being forced to fight for their own rights. The men who sit in political positions in this country have so abdicated their role as provider and protector in our culture that these young women are being forced to fight for the right to have women's sports, not to play against a biological man. And I love, by the way, that they cited not just fairness in women's sports, but they cited their safety. Because this transgender identifying individual, Blaire Fleming, a man born by the name of Braden Fleming, is actually hurting women on the volleyball court. Look at this spike. This is this man on the volleyball court with a bunch of women. Take a look at this.
Really making a run in that second set, and maybe even the first.
Here's Warden with the serve. The Spartans with a big kill. How about it, Blaire Fleming? 5 kills in this opening set,
spike.
And
now
they take the first 25
when
to
that
16.
spike hits the face
we'll be right
of
back.
A girl on the opposing team. Watch this. Ready? The set has happened. Now we got a spike. And knocks her to the ground. Knocks her down. By the way, the audience of that game was concerned for the rest of the game about their teammate because her face was all red from being spiked in the face by Blaire Fleming, whose real name is Braden Fleming, who is a man. This is not just a fairness issue. This is a safety issue. Blaire Fleming, by the way, ranks 3rd in the Mountain West Conference in kills and 2nd in points. So what does this mean? All the girls that are sitting on the bench of San Jose State University's volleyball team, they've lost their opportunity to play sports because a man is on the court. And it's unfair. As Redux reported, on average, the difference between upper body strength in the sexes is 52%. With men having 10% larger hands on average and being 7% taller, Redux said these factors have contributed to a volleyball net height difference of over 7 inches between male and female games. And according to his San Jose Spartans profile, Fleming stands at 6 foot 1 inch. 6 foot 1 inch. And like I said, these girls are forced to fight for themselves. The university that they play for, the University of Nevada, Reno, was apparently not consulted before these women voted amongst themselves. Good for them. I am bursting with pride for these young athletes. The university was not consulted before they forfeited, and boy, was that university unhappy. I'm going to read you their statement. Today's show, by the way, is sponsored by First Cup Coffee. You can go to firstcup.com, use my promo code Liz to save an additional 10% on your order or on the lifetime of your subscription. That's firstcup.com. Use promo code Liz for an additional 10%. The University of Nevada, Reno's the university administrators have condemned their own women athletes. This is what they say. On October 13th, 2024, the majority of members of the University of Reno or Nevada, Reno's women's volleyball team sent a statement to the university advising the institution that they were forfeiting its scheduled match with San Jose State University on October 26th, 2024. Oh, correction. I had said it was the 28th. It was the 26th. The players' decision and statement were made independently and without consultation with the university or the athletic department. The players' decision also does not represent the position of the university. The university and its athletic programs are governed by the Nevada Constitution and Nevada law, which strictly protect equality of rights under the law and that equality of rights shall not be denied or abridged by this state or any of its subdivisions on account of race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, disability, ancestry, or national origin. The university is also governed by federal law, as well as the rules and regulations of the NCAA and the Mountain West Conference, which include providing competition in an inclusive and supportive environment. The university intends to move forward with the match as scheduled, and the players may choose not to participate in the match on that day of the contest. No players will be subject to any team disciplinary action for their decision not to participate in the match. Does that make you want to vomit or what? These young women are playing on behalf of this school, making money for this school, helping this school win awards, and what do? The school throws them under the bus because they don't want to be spiked in the face by a biological man. Disgusting. The cowards. And this is why, of course, we've been calling for several years for institutions, and this includes from the federal level, the executive and the legislative branch, to the NCAA, which is a ostensibly private institution, although we know that it's governed by the laws of wokeism at this point, to venues, everyone. We've said, listen, stand up for these girls, create environments and sporting events that are fair to young women. None of these institutions have done this. Let me rephrase that. A few states, I think Idaho is one of them that has banned men playing in women's sports. A few states here and there, a few institutions here and there have answered the call. But by and large, people have ignored the plight of these young women. And look at what's happening. This is why these young women are forced to stand up for themselves. Blaire Fleming, born Braden Fleming, has been hiding the fact that he's a biological man for a long time. In fact, he previously played at a college called Coastal Carolina University. He transferred away from Coastal Carolina University because that state was passing a law that would have prohibited him from playing on female teams. So that state answered the call, but Braden simply fled to California. Left Carolina, fled to California. When did Braden transition into Blaire Fleming? This is what's interesting about this particular individual and what I think sets him apart from the Leah Thomas, University of Pennsylvania swimming controversy, is Leah Thomas previously swam as Will Thomas, and there are pictures of Thomas before he transitioned swimming as a man. There aren't too many pictures of Blaire Fleming back when he was Braden Fleming. We think, at least based on an investigation done by Redux, that Fleming transitioned sometime in high school. This is what Redux said. While the exact age Fleming was transitioned is unknown, early photos posted to his aunt's Facebook show that he was raised as a boy and only began presenting in feminine clothing in 2016, when he would have been approximately 14 years old. His family members have been careful not to publicly identify him as transgender, but his grandmother referred to him as her grandson in an early photo. So this is also, it's so deceitful. The school obviously knew about this, by the way, because if you look at current photos of Blaire Fleming's volleyball jersey is longer than your average volleyball jersey, which I can only assume is intending to hide male genitalia that would be on display in small female volleyball shorts, if you catch my drift. But Blaire Fleming seems to be trying to deceive the public, not by claiming to be transgender, but by just claiming to be a woman. Well, it's pretty clear, according to parents who have watched their daughters playing against Blaire Fleming in other games, that it was an open secret that Blaire Fleming is a man. Now, this is the choice that we have, America. Do we want to live in a country where our young girls are being spiked in the face by grown men during a volleyball game? Or do we want to live in a country that embraces objective truth, that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and a man is not a woman just because he has long hair and nail polish and wears fake eyelashes and wears a long jersey to try to hide his male genitalia? What nation do we want to live in? Because the option that we're being presented in November could not be starker. Kamala Harris believes that Blaire Fleming is a woman, which is ridiculous and insulting and demeaning. It doesn't just take us back to before women's rights, it obliterates the idea of a woman. Under a Trump presidency, contrast this with Kamala Harris, this is what Trump said he would do in this situation. Take a listen.
Up and down the ballot, how many of you are worried about biological men and boys competing against women and girls in sports? Just show me. That's almost that is the entire room. And I know you have a question.
I do. By the way, excuse me, it's so crazy.
Your question, your name and your hometown.
My name is Linda, and I'm from Milton, Georgia.
Good.
But originally Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, wow.
I'd get that.
Good.
Yeah. My question is, how do you plan on addressing the transgender issue in women's sports? I have 9 grandchildren, 6 of them female, all playing sports, and we are very concerned for their safety, not just on the field and the courts, but in their locker rooms as well.
Right. It's such an easy question, and everybody in the room, and you know that answer, we're not going to let it happen. You look, just yesterday, they had a volleyball match. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Where a person that transitioned, okay? We have to be very careful because this can terminate your political career if you say it's slightly off, all right? But transitioned from man to female and was on a volleyball. And I saw the slam. It was a slam. I never saw a ball hit so hard. Hit the girl on the head. But other people, even in volleyball, they've been permanently, I mean, they've been really hurt badly, women playing men. But you don't have to do the volleyball. We stop it. We stop it. We absolutely stop it. You can't have it. It's a man playing in the game. I mean, physically, from a muscular state, even if it was a little bit less, maybe they do all sorts of tests and drugs and everything else. Look at what's happened in swimming. Look at the records that are being broken.
So how do you stop it? Do you go to the sports leagues? Do you go to the Olympic
You just ban it. The president bans it. You just don't let it happen. Not a big deal.
You ban it. You just ban it. You don't let it happen. There you go. That's your contrast. You want Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris embraces a man spiking a girl in the face until her face is so red that the audience is worried about her. Donald Trump says, you ban it. It's simple. It's wrong. It's gross. And you ban it. Time is our most precious commodity. And I've heard from so many of you who've asked for my advice about how you can spend your time wisely to improve yourself, to improve the people around you. That's why I'm so excited that Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free online courses in the most important and enduring subjects. And by the way, this is not just for college-age students. This is for all of us to improve our minds. You can learn about the works of C.S. Lewis, the stories in the book of Genesis, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, or the history of the ancient Christian church with Hillsdale College's online courses, all available for free. That's right, for free. I personally recommend you sign up for C.S. Lewis on Christianity. In this 7-lecture course, you will examine some of Lewis's classic works, including Mere Christianity, the Screwtape Letters, the Abolition of Man, to see what Lewis had to say about scripture, prayer, suffering, joy, heaven, and hell. The course is self-paced, so again, don't worry. You can start whenever and wherever. Enroll now in C.S. Lewis on Christianity to discover Lewis's core lessons regarding the truth and goodness of the Christian life and how to apply those lessons to your life. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/Liz to start. It's free. It's easy to get started. It's for anybody. That's hillsdale.edu/Liz to start. hillsdale.edu/Liz. Speaking of Kamala Harris, we have an update on her plagiarism scandal. You remember the Kamala Harris plagiarism scandal. A so-called plagiarism hunter from Austria found that Kamala Harris, in her book, which she wrote in 2009, it's funny, by the way, a lot of you commented after Monday's episode and said, I didn't even know Kamala Harris wrote a book. Right. A lot of people didn't. It was a book that she wrote to introduce herself to the public. It was her first foray into politics in California after, Willie Brown. But it was her introduction as someone who was supposed to be tough on crime. This was her audition to be Attorney General of California. Published in 2009. A lot of people haven't read it, but the so-called plagiarism hunter from Austria, who's taken down German-speaking politicians for plagiarizing in the past, found that Kamala Harris had plagiarized at least 10 major passages of her book. We're talking plagiarism from the Associated Press, from NBC News, from government agencies, from think tank reports, and perhaps, this is kind of funny, from Wikipedia, perhaps funniest of all, from Wikipedia. So you might remember, and I'm going to liken this, Chris Rufo was the one who broke this story, even though the plagiarism hunter from Austria was the one who found the plagiarism. You might remember a couple of months ago when Chris Rufo took down the president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, for plagiarizing big parts of her doctoral thesis. And it was almost the exact same scenario that happened. So when Chris Rufo exposed Claudine Gay for plagiarism, immediately the New York Times went to bat for Claudine Gay. They said, oh, she's a black woman. You can't criticize her like this. It's racist. You're wrong. This plagiarism is is insignificant. And then, believe it or not, it was CNN, when Chris Rufo did not back down, it was CNN that was like, actually, this is significant plagiarism. Whether you want her to quit and resign, that's a different question, but it is actually plagiarism. And after that, again, thanks to Chris Rufo's perseverance and the outcry from the masses, because for some reason, we hate plagiarism. People across the aisle find plagiarism to be so disreputable, so unethical, it's not just lazy, it's stealing. We work so hard on our academic thoughts and writing papers and books and have someone else steal that and claim it for their own. People find that so distasteful and evil. Well, Claudine Gay ended up being forced to resign. Well, the New York Times is copying that exact playbook. As soon as Chris Rufo exposed Kamala Harris's book, the New York Times came out and tried to dismiss the fact that Kamala Harris had copied so much of another's work. This is what they say. In a review of the book, the New York Times found that none of the passages in question took the ideas or thoughts of another writer, which is considered the most serious form of plagiarism. Instead, the sentences copy descriptions of programs or statistical information that appear elsewhere. The New York Times goes on to say, Jonathan Bailey, a plagiarism consultant, so-called expert, in New Orleans and the publisher of Plagiarism Today, said on Monday that his initial reaction to Mr. Rufo's claims were that the errors were not serious, given the size of the document. He said, this amount of plagiarism amounts to an error and not an intent to defraud. He added that Mr. Rufo had taken relatively minor citation mistakes in a large amount of text and tried to, quote, make a big deal about it. Okay. So the New York Times is saying, well, it's totally okay to steal someone else's work and to copy someone else's work, to plagiarize and not cite, as long as it's not taking someone else's idea. If you're just taking their actual work, that's okay, they say, because it's Kamala Harris. And they insinuated that this was being motivated by Mr. Rufo's racism. Well, first of all, the New York Times is a ridiculous, absurd, biased organization. I don't need to tell you that, but it is worth noting because this is one of the most egregious examples. They're also wrong, though, when they say that Mr. Rufo found small passages. No, there's now been over a dozen major parts of Kamala Harris's book that she has just directly stolen from other people. In fact, this is the funniest part of all. The part that she stole from Wikipedia includes a major error that Wikipedia had in the particular article that Kamala Harris stole. And so Kamala Harris not only stole an idea that she found in Wikipedia, she stole the error that Wikipedia had published, which, if you believe in poetic justice, and I do, this is a real big heaping serving of it. So the New York Times is running the exact same playbook that they ran against Claudine Gay, which tells you and I something very important. And it's not just that they're biased, lying, ridiculous hacks. It tells us that if we keep the pressure on Kamala Harris and on Kamala Harris's publisher, which may be the next institution to fall in this whole saga, then this is going to be an effective October surprise. Now, why is that? Because plagiarism is universally reviled. You can ask why that is, because in the whole scheme or the whole totem pole of morality and immorality, you can make an argument, and I'd probably agree with you if you made the argument, that plagiarism is not as serious as stealing money. Plagiarism is not as serious as burglary or assault, certainly not as serious as rape or murder. But for some reason, people find plagiarism to be absolutely revolting. It's actually, think of transgenderism. Think of how evil it is if you take a little boy, a 6-year-old, 7-year-old boy, and you put him in a dress and you put him on puberty blockers, and then ultimately you groom him into having transgender surgery. That is so evil. It is so wrong. But what actually triggered the American public about the transgender issue? It wasn't seeing these children being groomed into being trans. It wasn't seeing these groomer teachers in school. What actually triggered the massive outcry amongst the American people was men playing in women's sports. Which, again, you could argue a man, even if he spikes a volleyball into a girl's face, and that's so wrong and it's so infuriating, it's not as morally egregious as chemically castrating a 7-year-old boy. And yet, the American people's outcry has come as a response to men in women's sports, not to little boys being chemically castrated. Likewise with immigration. Think of the story of Laken Riley in Georgia, this young girl who was out for a run. She went to the University of Georgia and she was accosted. She'd done nothing wrong, was in no unsafe scenario. She was accosted and brutally raped and murdered by an illegal alien who was in this country, not only illegally, but he'd been previously deported and come back again, thanks to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's invitation and permissive open borders policies. That's beyond infuriating. This makes me angrier than I can think of. And yet, the outcry from the American public about the immigration crisis hasn't been in response to the horrific rapes and murders of innocent women in our country. The outcry over the immigration crisis came after it was exposed that Haitian migrants were eating cats in Ohio, in Springfield. Again, eating cats, the mass migration overwhelming a system, making a housing crisis worse, filling a school with non-English speaking students, resulting in car wrecks, all of that's bad. But if you're weighing the morality of, well, a young woman raped and murdered or Haitians eating cats, obviously the rape and murder is worse, significantly worse, uncomparably worse. And yet the American people's outcry over illegal immigration has been after that. Sometimes you can't explain human nature. You just have to identify what it is that people react to. Well, let me tell you, people react to plagiarism. The American people, Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, we do not accept plagiarism. It has been something where if you're a journalist or you're an academic, this is career ending if you commit plagiarism. And so we have an opportunity, my friends, right now to make this plagiarism career ending for Kamala Harris. But it requires not just, oh, I hope someone does something about it. I hope something comes of this. It requires you. You are the person to make something come of it. It's on you. It's on me. It's on us together to raise our voices. Make mainstream media outlets respond to this. Make her publisher pull this book off the market. Make her respond to this over and over. Make other academics who don't want their work stolen condemn her for this. Because let me tell you, the American people on both sides of the aisle are primed for this. Plagiarism is not just a career-ending offense from the past. It is a career-ending offense in the present if we make it to be. But it's up to us. The second presidential debates, as we like to call it around here, exposed the blatant truth. The media is no longer just biased. It actually controls the narrative. Kamala Harris was given free rein to lie without a single fact check, while President Trump was bombarded with constant interruptions and phony corrections. We've long suspected that we have a state-controlled media, but now it's glaringly obvious. We are living in a media-controlled state. From President Biden's quiet exit from the political scene to Kamala's carefully orchestrated rise and the persistent efforts to undermine and even harm President Trump, the media's hand has been evident throughout it all. Blaze Media is the antidote. While mainstream outlets distort and deceive you, Blaze Media is committed to delivering the truth to those who love and fight for the American way of life. We refuse to be controlled or silenced. At a time when media manipulation is at its peak, independent platforms like Blaze TV are more crucial than ever. We are here to challenge the narrative and provide real, unfiltered coverage that puts you in control. That's why right now, we are offering our biggest discount yet, $40 off an annual subscription. If you love this show and you support what Blaze Media stands for, visit blazetv.com/Liz and use code Liz40 at checkout to join our movement. America, you deserve the truth. You deserve the truth. Blaze Media is here to deliver it. Go to blazetv.com/Liz and use code Liz40 at checkout. So new reporting on the Afghan National who plotted the terrorist attack. He was planning to commit a terror attack right here in the United States on Election Day. And new reporting from Jackie Heinrich shows that the Kamala Harris-Joe Biden administration are lying to us again about this individual, that their open borders mass migration policies are to blame for what could have been a deadly attack against not just our voting day, not just our institution of government, but against our families as we turn out to cast our ballots for the next president of the United States. This is what Jackie Heinrich reported. The Biden-Harris administration now admits that an Afghan national accused of plotting an Election Day terror attack did not undergo certain vetting they previously claimed he passed. Nasir Ahmad Tawhidi was never vetted or approved by the State Department for special immigrant status. It's called SIV, special immigrant visa status, despite officials from other agencies claiming that he cleared that stringent process. You'll remember, by the way, guys, that this migrant was brought to the United States during Biden's or in the immediate aftermath of Biden's botched withdrawal of Afghanistan. They were evacuating some American citizens, although not all, and Afghan nationals who had cooperated with the U.S. government over in Afghanistan at any point throughout that war. They were bringing interpreters and security individuals who had partnered with the U.S. Well, according to Jackie Heinrich, sources familiar with the investigation tell Fox that Nasir Ahmad Tawhidi was not well known to the U.S. government when the administration facilitated his departure to the U.S., despite his security role with the CIA in Afghanistan. Tawhidi was employed as a local guard outside the base perimeter, and he would not have been among the most thoroughly vetted U.S. partners. The news upends claims that officials made last week that Tawhidi was vetted 3 times. Number 1, to work for the CIA in Afghanistan. Number 2, to come to the U.S. on DHS humanitarian parole during the withdrawal. And 3, when he was approved for special immigrant status after arriving in the U.S. So what does this mean, my friends? It means that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are responsible for bringing a migrant to the United States from a nation rife with terrorism specifically aimed at killing as many Americans as possible. We knew they would take advantage of that and infiltrate these flights here to the U.S. The Biden administration gaslit us and said, "Oh, you're crazy. These people have been vetted. They're fine. They were U.S. allies. Don't be xenophobes." Well, we're not xenophobes. It gives me no pleasure to say we were right. Our warnings are given for a reason, not just to prove that we know more than the left, but to keep our families and our country safe. And by the way, if you look on the DHS website, this is what it says. It says Afghans who have completed the special immigrant visa process and who possess visas and their dependents will be admitted as lawful permanent residents and assisted by the Department of State and non-governmental organizations to begin their resettlement process. Those individuals who have not finished the SIV, special immigrant visa application process, are paroled by DHS. Paroled. So it's actually on the Department of Homeland Security website publicly that says, well, if you haven't completed this process, you're just going to be released into the United States and considered to be on parole. Which brings us to the question, exactly how many more of these Afghan migrants who we were told were vetted aren't vetted and are on so-called parole in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our cities, and near our families? That's a question that I think Kamala Harris owes us an answer to. Don't kid yourself. The future of the Supreme Court is on the ballot. The radical left wants to eliminate the court's conservative majority by packing the Supreme Court with their own hand-picked justices. We're talking judicial activists to the extreme in order to get the political outcomes that they want. Even President Biden has gotten into the act by making reforming the court one of his final priorities before he leaves office. But don't be fooled by that euphemism. Their endgame is really just court packing. At First Liberty, they call this assault on the court what it actually is, a Supreme Court coup. They are trying to eliminate the independence of the judiciary. The frightening thing is that come January, their plan could become our nation's reality. Simple majority votes in the House and in the Senate, combined with the president's signature, could turn their plan to pack the court into the law of our land. That's why they're sounding the alarm, and they need you to join them. If we take action together, you and I, if we unite our voices, we can put a stop to the radical left's plan to take control of the Supreme Court. As the 2024 election approaches, we need to do 3 things. Number 1, find out where each of your candidates stand on the radical issue of packing and purging the court. Number 2, share what you learn with everyone you know. Number 3, do your civic duty and vote. The future of the court, of preserving it as an independent judiciary, is literally in our hands. If we lose the court, we will lose the country. That's why First Liberty is taking action, and they need all of us to join them. With patriots like you standing for the Supreme Court, we can safeguard the independence of the judiciary just as the founding fathers intended. Go to supremecoup.com/Liz. That's supremecoup.com/Liz to learn how you can help stop the radical left's takeover of the Supreme Court. All right, up in Detroit, we have an anomaly of data when it comes to the rate of submission of absentee ballots. A rate of 40% of absentee ballots have supposedly allegedly been returned in Detroit. Now, this number, 40%, you'll notice, compared to the number that's just second on the list, Grand Rapids, is only at 26%. Well, that's a pretty significant difference. How is a city that's run as poorly and corruptly as Detroit running their election system so efficiently that they have almost half of their absentee ballots already processed when we are still 20 days before the election? 20 days before the election. This is the highest rate of returned ballots of any city in the nation. Let me just say this. Nobody believes that this happened organically. Nobody believes that this is on the up and up. Nobody believes that Detroit is just killing it. They're just doing a great job with their absentee ballots. Remember, this was Detroit during the 2020 election on election day. This is Detroit poll workers and what they were doing to the windows of the rooms where ballots were being counted. Take a look at this and then tell me if you think that Detroit is simply processing their absentee ballots this year in 2024 effectively and efficiently. You'll see big poster boards being plastered to windows by election workers because the American people, you and I, were standing outside of those windows. We wanted to understand what was happening in Detroit, why votes were being counted and then weren't being counted anymore, why there was strange and fishy things happening in that room where absentee ballots were being counted. And what did they do? They posted poster board over the windows so that we couldn't see. Let me just remind you that Detroit is one of the most terrible states, or one of the most terrible cities in our country. And I say this without any insult to the people who live in Detroit. I assume, by the way, as a Midwesterner, I assume that most people know that when I categorize Detroit as one of the worst cities in the United States, you should know that that description of Detroit comes from the people who live in Detroit. They believe that Democrats have run their city into the ground. And it is Democrat, by the way. The last Republican mayor in the city of Detroit was in 1962. So the responsibility for the state of Detroit falls squarely on the laps of Democrats who have run that city. But Detroit is in crisis. The literacy rate in Detroit is only 47%. That means that 1 out of every 2 adults, half of people in the city of Detroit are effectively illiterate. So you're telling me that in a city where half of adults are illiterate, half of their absentee ballots have already been processed, and we're just supposed to believe that this is on the up and up? I'm sorry, I don't buy that. People cheat all the time in all different kinds of things. People cheat in Irish dance competitions. People cheat in fishing competitions. People cheat in math competitions. People cheat in chess competitions. People cheat even when competitions are televised and have referees and moderators who are supposed to walk around to detect cheating. These are all, by the way, real cases that you can look up. These are not hypothetical. Irish dance, fishing, math, chess. But you're trying to tell me that we shouldn't suspect. You're trying to tell me it's too hard to believe that people would cheat in elections, which matters so much more, no offense, than Irish dance competitions, fishing competitions, and chess competitions. If you're making that case to me, then you're trying to tell me that human nature is suddenly absent in elections when it exists in every other scenario on the face of the earth. And I don't buy that. Tim Walz claims that identifying Detroit as a failed city is insulting to the people that live there. He said, "You're insulting the Midwest." Take a look at this.
Donald Trump was in Detroit and he said, our whole country will end up being Detroit. You're going to have a mess on your hands. Well, look, I know you don't, that's not unexpected for him. That's exactly what he's going to do, tear down America. But if the guy would have ever spent any time in the Midwest, like all of us know, we'd know Detroit's experiencing American comeback and renaissance. Look, I'm a Twins fan, and you whipped our ass. We know where this is. Detroit's there, so we know. City's growing, crime's down, factories are opening up. But those guys, all they know about manufacturing is manufacturing bullshit every time they show up. Every time they show up.
First of all, any revitalization of Detroit is thanks to President Trump revitalizing our economy, because the reason that Detroit is problematic is not because of the people that live there. It's because the politicians who run it and the woke corporations that offshored all of the factories, sending them overseas, costing Detroit residents their jobs. When Donald Trump criticizes Detroit, he's not criticizing the people. He's saying, I want something better for you, the people. He's criticizing the government that's hurting the people. Whereas Tim Walz is giving what I would call the epitome of a Democrat perception of the world. He's saying your poverty and your problems, that's your culture. I don't want to trigger you or insult your culture. I don't want to improve your life because that's your culture. That's actually what's insulting. To think that people can't pull themselves out of a situation that government put them in, that they have no capacity to earn a better life, or that they don't desire a better life. Between those two, Tim Walz and Donald Trump, those two messages, I'll choose Donald Trump's message every time. But speaking of insulting people, this is actually why I bring up Detroit. Tim Walz says, that's what Donald Trump does. He tears people down. He insults people. There's an article that was published in Salon magazine, and it's talking about understanding the mega mindset. And I confess to you that this article is like nothing I have ever seen in my life. I've seen a lot of hatred thrown at you, thrown at me. I mean, I read my X timeline on a daily basis. I've seen a lot of vitriol. I've heard myself called, falsely accused of being a racist, a xenophobe, a homophobe, a transphobe, of being an internalized misogynist, of being bigoted, and all these other intolerant, all these other different false accusations. This is the first time that I've ever heard Donald Trump supporters described as such. And this article was written by an epidemiologist who says, I understand mega as an epidemic disease, infecting many through what I call brain flaws. It's not their fault. There are brain pathways for copying and following others in the cortex, dopamine system, and pain centers to motivate conformity and violence. This is a movement of violence. Violence is a disease, and specifically a contagious disease. The disease spreads through the brain, these brain processes. The mega movement is a dangerous and lethal syndrome of what I describe as authoritarian violence disorder. Donald Trump is a massive super spreader. The contagion and the moral disengagement it causes provokes cruelty and obedience. This is accelerated by the effects of constant lies. Streams of lies are not just lies to be fact-checked, but an accelerant that impacts people's brains, causing moral disengagement, allowing people to abandon their own decision-making and obey. So let me get this straight. Tim Walz says that Donald Trump spends his time demeaning people, while this quote-unquote epidemiologist says the entire mega movement, meaning half of our country that voted for Donald Trump in 2 different elections and plans to vote for him in a third, have brain flaws. Do you know what this is? This is the language of eugenics. It is first by dehumanizing someone, calling them a terrorist, saying that their ideology has corrupted their person in order to allow the government to punish them. And then the second part of the language is to tell people that they are less than human based on some part of their body. It used to be the color of people's skins that was used as a justification in the minds of immoral perverts to propagate eugenics. And now we are told that if we vote for Donald Trump, we have a brain flaw, a physical deformity that what? What's the next step here? If it's a physical deformity that actually leads to violence, then the only answer to that is what? Well, the inference, of course, is that the only inference would be to stop and end the people who have the flaw that supposedly causes the violence. This is exactly what I would expect from an epidemiologist after COVID. They dehumanize people with lockdowns. They dehumanize people with masks. They dehumanize people, reducing them to simply pathogens. They wanted us to take a vaccine, regardless of whether it hurt us. And now they're telling us that if we vote for Trump, that we have a fundamental brain flaw that leads to violence, that we are somehow less human than they are. But yeah, Tim Walz, identifying that Detroit is a failed city, that's the problem. All right, with me now is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, John Lott. You guys can go and look at his work at crimeresearch.org. John, good to see you.
Great to talk to you again. It's been a while.
It has been a while, but you have been a busy man. You have an article out just today about the crime data. This is, just to give a little context to our viewers, we all remember the infamous fact check in the presidential debate when Donald Trump was talking about increasing crime rates, and ABC News was like, there has not been increasing crime rates, according to the FBI. this you have found is false. Can you explain?
Right. Well, the FBI every September puts out its data for the preceding year. And I noticed just by comparing the Excel files that they put out for last year and this year for 2022 and 2023, that there were large changes that had occurred in their data. They somehow missed mentioning that in their press release or in the report. The only thing in their report on the data, they have a footnote that says that they've revised or I guess updated the data for 2022, but beyond that, they mentioned nothing about the change. And what the change is, it amounted to originally, they said that there was a 2.1% drop in violent crime in 2022. And of course, we've seen news headlines over the course of the last year saying crime is down, but people mistakenly think that it's increasing. And as you mentioned, David Muir in the presidential debate was referring to their data because the data for 2023 wasn't out yet. But rather than that 2.1% drop, it turns out that in 2022, the FBI is now saying that it increased by 4.5%, which, by the way, is even larger than what they're currently saying is the drop for 2023, which is 3.5%. But essentially what happened is they missed over 80,000 violent crimes. They missed 1,699 murders, over 10,000 rapes, missed 33,000 robberies, and missed 37,000 aggravated assaults. And for property crimes, they missed 198,000 property crimes that they hadn't included in their numbers. And so, whether they decided not to kind of point this out to people, and I can't really blame the media because I'm sure most of the media just looks at the press release and quickly writes up a story on it. Maybe some enterprising guy may actually glance through the report that's there, but they're not going to go and pull up Excel files from different years to go and make comparisons across them. And so, I was, for the article for Real Clear Investigations, I talked to a guy who headed up the Bureau of Justice Statistics and asked him if one of his reports had gone from a negative to a positive number in terms of crime, whether he would have mentioned it in the press release or in the report. And he said, yes, definitely, he would have mentioned it in both. I mean, that's a pretty big change there, and particularly given how much weight and importance the media has given it over the course of the last year.
So when you say that 1,699 murders were missed, what does that mean? How do they miss that?
When they've updated the data,
reports are ignored, or they what?
Well, it's kind of a black box. They don't explain what happened. They just give you the data. I've reached out to them to ask them to explain what happened, but they're recording an increase of 1,699 murders in 2022 over what they have in 2021. And that increase wasn't there before. When the data was released for 2022, the quote final data for 2022 that was released in September 2023, they were missing all these murders. There's this increase in murders that they're now reporting that they should have mentioned before, that are now just being mentioned now, but you'd only see that by comparing these old Excel files.
It's so deceptive. It's also, I think, a good reminder when the mainstream media and the left have told us, it's a form of gaslighting, actually. Over the course of the past year, every time a conservative has said, listen, our cities are facing an increase in violent crime, or our neighborhoods aren't as safe, and the left said, oh, violent crime is going down. Actually, we should follow our guts, because I know it can be hard in a debate if you don't have the data, but we know, our personal experiences, we know that the violent crime rate is not going down.
Right. Look, there's two main types of data that we have on crime. We have the FBI data on reported crime, but we know most crimes aren't reported to police. And we know that there have been issues over the last few years in the rate that crimes are reported to police. And then there's something called, from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is also in the Department of Justice, called the National Crime Victimization Survey, which surveys 240,000 people a year. So we know about 45% of violent crimes are reported to police. We know only about 30% of property crimes. And if you look at the national crime victimization data during the Biden administration, violent crime, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault has increased by 55%, a 42% increase in rapes, a 63% increase in robberies, and a 55% increase in aggravated assaults. There is never, in the 51 years that the national crime victimization data has been out there, there's never been such a large percentage increase in violent crimes. The largest previous 3-year increase was in 2006, where they recorded a 27% increase. So the increase during the Biden administration is slightly more than twice as large than the largest previous increase that was there. But the media has just refused to go and mention the national crime victimization data. The national crime victimization data came out in September last month also. You will look in vain outside of articles in the New York Post and in the Washington Times for discussions about the huge increases that are there. I mean, if you're going to go and ask people, do you care more about the number of crimes reported to police, or do you care more about what's happening to total crime? I think most people would say they care much more about total crime. And there's reasons why those two have diverged. I mean, I'll give you one example, and that is over the last couple of years, if you call up 911 in many parts of the country, they'll go and ask you if the criminal is still there committing the crime. And if you say no, then they'll say, well, you can come down to the police station and wait in line, and we'll have a police report filled out. That wasn't true a few years ago. A few years ago, they would have sent out a police car to wherever the crime was to take a police report. But since we've had cuts in police budgets, since we've had large numbers of retirements among police officers, we're in a situation now where they just can't do that anymore. And, beyond that, and so those wouldn't have been recorded in the FBI data as even reported crimes. But, beyond that, you talk about property crimes. You go into a CVS or a Walgreens in many major cities, from Los Angeles and San Francisco to Chicago to Washington, D.C. or New York, and you're going to find most or all of everything in the store behind plexiglass. If you want to go and buy something, you have to have a store clerk come over, unlock it, and stand next to you while you read the ingredients on the packages if you're trying to decide what you're going to go and buy. People know that wasn't true a few years ago. And, and they know that it's very costly for the stores. It's not something that they want to do, but they're being forced to do it because of the amount of theft that's occurring. And so, but the point is, it's not just property crime that people can easily see with their own eyes, just in terms of how the stores are having to react. They know that it's happening for violent crimes too. And so while we've had headline after headline over the last year that has used these 2022 numbers to go and claim crime is falling, though people mistakenly think that it's increasing, I think people were right, and that and at least for reported crime, it's now clear. It'd be interesting to see now that this information about the FBI being unwilling to talk about this or acknowledge this openly before goes viral, what the response from the FBI is going to be officially, because I think they'll create even more news coverage. And also whether the media is going to be running stories saying, whoops, we're sorry, what we were telling you over the last year was wrong.
Well, I think the media is already in damage control mode on behalf of the Kamala Harris campaign, because there was a segment just last night on CNN where the so-called anchor, I mean, they're all just biased personalities at this point. The so-called anchor was saying, well, a president is not really in control of the crime rate. You can't really blame either Trump or Biden. That's a state issue, a local issue when crime rates go up or down. What would you, I mean, you've spent your career analyzing this data, what levers move crime rates up or down. What would you attribute as the biggest factors that have led to this rise of crime?
Well, I don't think it's rocket science about why we've seen the increase in crime. Higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences, letting victims defend themselves. All those things make it riskier for criminals to go and commit crime. And unfortunately, we've had cuts in police budgets. We've had massive retirements. We've had left-wing district attorneys who are refusing to prosecute violent criminals. We've had liberal judges refusing to sentence or to release large numbers of inmates from local jails and prisons. We've had bail reform. Are there things that can be done federally, even though I've argued and I agree it's largely a local issue? Yeah. One of the things you can do is you can say, look, we're not going to give you all this federal funding unless you go and prosecute these violent criminals that are here. You know, if you're in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg has reduced 60% of the felony charges that criminals were facing in 2023. Almost all those were reduced from felonies to misdemeanors. You know, the typical case is what would have been an aggravated assault. What can differentiate an aggravated assault from a simple assault is whether a weapon is used. But he's refusing to go and prosecute people who have firearms offenses. Because he says it disproportionately impacts minorities. Well, you know, he can make that decision on that, but the problem is that if you're reducing all these felonies to misdemeanors or just deciding not to prosecute them at all, it makes it a lot less risky for criminals to go and commit these crimes. And guess what? You're going to have more crimes occurring. So the Biden administration can do things. Biden administration, Kamala Harris, they have. You cannot find them criticizing one of these left-wing prosecutors who are refusing to prosecute violent criminals. Not one time do they make a criticism. Not once do they criticize the bail reform that's there. Not once do they criticize these left-wing judges that are refusing to prosecute these criminals. And so there's lots of things that can be done, both kind of in terms of just the rhetoric, but also in terms of withholding funding for places that are refusing to go and make it riskier for criminals to commit crime. And beyond that, the types of gun control laws that they keep pushing and regulations are disarming law-abiding good citizens. And that's another way you can make it risky for criminals to go and commit crime. The Biden-Harris administration has put literally thousands of gun dealers out of business for trivial, tiny paperwork typos. You know, you transpose two letters in one word 18 years ago. No other typos in the next 18 years. And they'll go back and use that to reopen a case that even the Obama administration had closed in order to take away your license to be able to go and sell firearms. You know, they've used Operation Choke Point, which the Trump administration had ended. Obama had started it, which puts pressure on financial institutions not to go and do business with companies that they don't approve of. And so you have situations from companies in the oil industry to firearms who can't find financial institutions to go and handle the credit cards or the checks for their customers. Are there ways around that? Yeah, sure, but they're usually a lot more costly. And those additional costs may put some of them out of business or at least raise the prices that they have to go and charge their customers. But there's a whole array of different regulations and things that they've done that have made it more costly, more difficult for people to be able to go and defend themselves and their families. And so there are things that they can do easily in terms of the gun control issues that would make it riskier for criminals to go and commit crimes.
And the commonality that I'm hearing in all of these different things is the Democrat policies have incentivized crime, or removed disincentives to crime, and Republican policies have made it riskier for criminals to commit crimes. I mean, it's something, it really is as black and white as that. And I'm glad it is, because we face a choice in less than 3 weeks of what we want to be, what we want our nation to be. And I think I speak for us all when we say we want America to be safe again. John Lott, thank you for bringing up those Excel spreadsheets and analyzing that data and sharing it with our country. You've done a service to us all. And I'll talk to you again soon.
People can find more at our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. Thank you very much.
We'll drop that URL in the description to this episode. John, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Guys, if you haven't already subscribed to my newsletter, go to LizWheelerNewsletter.com, drop your email, LizWheelerNewsletter.com. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.